Hi, I'm Selena, and I'm from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with Heidi E.Y. Stemple, and she is a children's book author. And Heidi, I'm going to let you explain exactly what it is that you write.
Okay, I am a children's book author and I write for all ages. So I have books out that start at the very, very youngest. So little board books that are good for chunky fingers and kids who like to still eat their books. This one happens to be a pop or a lift the flap book.
Hmm.
And I write for ages kids just learning to read. This one happens to be a graphic reader. I write picture books. I write much longer stuff. And I even have one published short story for adults. So I run the gambit of what I write. A lot of my stuff is feminist. A lot of my stuff is nature-based. But I would say that also I write in all sorts of spaces that are not those two, which would I think would be my most populated stories.
Aha. Okay. So what can readers expect from your newest book? And
Okay. What my newest my newest book this year. So my
this year,
newest
yeah.
book, I know if you had asked me 2 months ago, it would have been a different book. So my newest book is
Aha.
There Might Be a KAZOO Emergency. And what I love, I've been writing these ready to reads for a while, for a couple years now. I think they are the most fun I've ever had writing books because it's really hard to sell picture books these days that are funny
Hmm.
and just sort of just straight fun. And even sometimes these are rhyming. So you can see these are very specific for a certain level of reader. But this year, this one came out. There might be a KAZOO emergency. And by the way, I shamelessly stole the title from my niece. But this one is a graphic novel reader. And so it has very few words, but they're readable for all kids. And what I love about them is that in the beginning, the characters explain to the new readers how to read a graphic novel, which I think is the neatest concept, the absolutely most fun concept. So I would say I've had a bunch of the readers come out in the last 2 years. I'm working on the series that I showed you first with Toucan with Toucans and Flamingo Bingo. They're
Hmm.
all silly situations that birds get into. So see, sort of nature adjacent because they're not really flamingos or toucans. They are very silly. But that's a series arc of 6 books. So now I've started this graphic novel one as well. But also this year, I had Whose Nest Is Best, which I showed first, come out, which I love. And I'm just working on now a companion. I'm not going to tell you what it is because it's not sold yet, but a companion to this book, which really is my favorite thing to write about, which is birds, because I come from a family of bird watchers and I was raised by a bird watcher. And I was raised by my dad, who was a bird watcher, also a computer science professor. But also I was kind of raised to write a lot because if your listeners, watchers, what do you call people who are watching on a podcast that is video? Uh, if they don't know,
Watchers.
I'm definitely a second. I'm really a third generation writer, but many people will know my mom, who's author Jane Yolen. So that's the Y in my EY in the middle of my name. So a bunch of the books that I write are with her. I started my career writing with her. And now I'd say I write more on my own than with her, but we still try and get in at least a
Yep.
book a year together. This is this is actually not our last one together, but this is I Am the Storm, which we did together, which is a picture book, which actually right now, when we're recording this, we are suffering from the wildfires in Canada, really clogging up our air. My publisher just posted this is a good way to talk about forest fires in a gentle way with children, among other storms. And just last year, my mom and I, our second book of we started with stinky animals and then we went to animals that suck or suction. So Yuck, You Suck, which another great title. And this is all poetry about animals who suck or suction. So I gave you a sort of a really long-winded answer of what was my last book out because
Yeah,
kind of a lot
yeah.
of them.
Well, I love your titles for Yuck You Suck and then Eek You Reek.
Yeah, we're trying to get another one. And we're thinking of either Icky You're Sticky, Drat You Spat, or what's the other one? There's another one and I can't remember what it is. But
Those
we
are
keep
just
trying. We want a trilogy of these. We definitely want 3. So we're waiting on the publisher for that.
those are just wonderful and wonderful subjects too. I just love them.
You know what? I absolutely love writing poetry. And I
Right.
love writing
Yes.
nonfiction poetry because that gives you sort of these set of rules that go along with the poem, which is fun. So you can't just write a poem about anything. It's not about feelings. You still want to do all the fun stuff that you get to do in poetry, but you've got to get those facts in. So the research for them is fun because you pick up all these words or concepts that go with these animals, and then you have to get those in the poem. So it almost gives you the backbone of the poem that you need to flesh out on the outside of it. So
Okay.
that's
You're,
super fun.
you're talking about research. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So, what is your favorite research story of any of your books?
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a great, that's a great question. Okay, so probably my most favorite research story has to do with not so much research, but how something well, I have a lot. I'll tell you a funny story about like present research, but so I don't want to give away too many of the ideas about books I want to do, but if you don't know, my mom wrote Caldecott winning 1988 book Owl Moon. And that book stars a dad and a little girl who went out owling. And most people in the children's book world know that that's myself and my dad, and it's a family story. So I grew up owling, and I very much, for years and years and years and years, wanted to tell the story of my point of view. Well, I couldn't tell my point of view as the little girl because that had already been told, right? And I can't tell it better because Owl Moon is perfect the way it is. But I knew that there was more to the story. And so I spent a lot of time trying to write it as a fictional story of maybe the mom, me, taking her daughter out owling, because I have a daughter and I've done a lot of that. And there's actually still a couple story ideas that I'm looking at doing around that, but it's much less the similar story. And I think I tried for about 6 years to do that. And I just failed and failed and failed. And the thing about writing is it is absolutely all about failure, because you don't get to your idea without taking all those roads that you think are the right ones before getting to the right story. And it's almost like chiropractic. Like you're all looking at all different ways, but when it goes and falls right into place, you know it immediately, hopefully. And then your editor tells you you're wrong anyway. So it's another failure and you have to work again. But there are those moments where things are just like, oh my goodness, this is right. And so I was trying so hard to figure out how to tell this story. And once a year, the owling that I do now, still as a grown-up, is once a year I go out owling for the Audubon Christmas bird count. And I
Right.
go out at midnight and I bring out my gang, my crew. We call ourselves the OMG, the Owl Moon Gang. And we count owls for science. And I started to get a little more curious. I knew about the history of our count here in Western Massachusetts, where I live and where I do the count. And I talked with the compiler about that. Then I started thinking about what it is we're doing. And I started doing just for my own self, looking up, what's the history of the count. And I started to realize that was the story that I wanted to tell. I found out that this nerdy guy who ran the bird exhibit at the National Museum in New York, the Natural History Museum in New York, he had a magazine called Bird Lore. And oh my goodness, I'm ringing by accident here. All of my ringers should be off. So he posted on social media. It wasn't on social media. He wrote in his magazine that he wanted people to stop doing their Christmas bird count. The bird count that happened back before 1900 was called a side hunt. So on Christmas Day, the sports hunters would go out and shoot as many birds as they could. And the team that won was the one that shot and killed the most birds. Well, this wonderfully nerdy guy said, hey, in his magazine, and I read exactly what it said. And he said, instead of, he said it in much more highfalutin language, but what he really said was, hey, let's stop shooting them. And instead, let's do a census with our eyes and ears. And if you count them and send me the information, I will publish that in my magazine. And that was on Christmas Day, 1900. And the count still goes on. So I'm a very small part. And therefore the girl from Owl Moon is a very small part of this thing that started out with 27 birders in 25 locations and is now over 80,000 people all over the world counting birds. So I went from wanting to tell my story to realizing my story had already been told, trying to figure out how to tell my story as an adult, to stumbling into the research that became this book right here, which is the history of the Audubon Christmas bird count. And it starts out, Frank Chapman loved birds. So here's that wonderfully nerdy guy in his museum. And it takes you through the history of what he did, because it was about the conservation at the time. And it brings you to the first count, and then on to modern counts, where one of my favorite lines in the books is, it starts with all birds are welcome. And then it talks about different ways that you can count. And it says, all birders are welcome. So it became this little niche thing, which has opened up. And one of the proudest things I've done in my whole writing career is I started at our nature center here, a family section in our count circle of bird watchers, of kids and their families officially getting in on our count. So I thought that was a neat thing. So that was sort of a stumbled upon while trying to write something else, which I love. But then, every day I find new and cool stories that either make me want to write about the nonfiction of it or use it as a jumping off place for a story. Now everybody, I want to write this book, so don't steal my idea, please, please. I was recently at my significant other's son's graduation from college, and behind their house, literally behind their house, in their backyard, there's train tracks that go up and stop. Old train tracks, not usable ones. They're obviously the remains of it. Now, why didn't they demolish this? They said, oh, a train went there and crashed and it was filled with chocolate. And I said, what? Don't you people know what I do for a living? You guys have lived here for a year and no one has told me this story. So I am busily collecting research to see if I can make that into a book. And I don't think there's enough there to make it a nonfiction book. But a writer's brain goes, all right, so there's not enough for a nonfiction book because, no one was hurt. I was like, oh, that makes it a better book. But, nothing really happened. And it's sort of almost an anecdote and not really a full story. But my writer brain thinks, but how can I make it a story? And then in the back matter, I can say this was based on a real thing that happened. So I love those moments where you stumble upon something that you cannot believe it's not a book yet. So that's my hope, is to write that book.
And as your mother said at the Society for Children's Book Writers and Illustrators conference, you find stories in everything.
Yes, there's so many stories that I had there. I mean, we joke in our family because I'm not only the daughter of a writer, I'm also, my brothers both write, one to a large extent, one to a much less extent. He's a nature photographer. My daughter, who's a lawyer, she just graduated law school. She says, Mom, I'm not going to be a writer. We're like, that's great. That's wonderful, honey. But she has 2 books published with her grandmother. And my niece, who I think is going to be our real 3rd generation writer, has a book coming out with my mom called Kiki Kicks, which I'm really excited about that. I think it's either August or early in the fall. So that's a new book. Very excited. I forgot where I was going with that sentence, but anyway, I think this is where I was going. We talk all the time about there being just too many ideas. People who are friends who aren't writers, they will send you messages like, "Oh, I have a great idea for a story." I'm like, I have enough. Please don't give me more. I have files. I'm going on a writer's retreat at the end of this month, and I have, I think, 7 files that I think, oh, these are the first priority. I need to work on these first. It's too many.
So I don't have to ask you the question of what made you want to become a writer.
Oh, I didn't want to become a writer. I was sure I was not going to become a writer. I was a decent writer. I have always been everybody's ghostwriter, sort of, I've always helped people with their writing, and I knew that I was competent. And part of that is because I suspect part of that is hereditary, but part of that is because both my parents were also academics and they expected us to write all the time. And my brothers and I joke, my younger brother, not so much because he was very young at the time. So my mom, he would dictate more than write. But my middle brother and myself, we would be expected on our vacations to have our notebook. And at the end of the day, I mean, you'd call them writing prompts now, but before, my mother would fill them in first, like that to Tuesday night when we're driving to West Virginia. What was your favorite thing today? Or what did you learn today? What didn't you like? Whatever those things were. And we joke because we were probably the only children who handed in their journals to their mother and got it red line edited back. In a gentle and loving way. We love you, Mom. But we were really expected to understand the process of writing. And so I suspect that has a lot to do with it. That being said, my degree is in psychology and human resources, which is different than like a company with human resources. It was about the helping professions and the professions it was with social work and criminal justice. And I wound up starting my career working as a probation parole officer. And I was a private investigator. And I did all sorts of jobs sort of in and around that. I worked with victims. I worked with criminals. I worked, sort of all around that. And on the day, I had applied to a battered women's shelter to become a counselor. And on the day that I found out that I got the job, I also found out that I was pregnant, and I was super, super sick. And this was 29 years ago because it was with the 28-year-old lawyer. And I couldn't take the job because I was really sick. And my mom said, I just got asked to write a short story for a book called Famous Writers and Their Kids Write Spooky Stories. Would you like to? And I said, yes, which I'd never said yes before because that wasn't what I wanted to do. But it was something to fill the time. And in the process of writing that, I found out that not only was I good at it, but I could do it. That's something you need to know. Like I always wrote, but I didn't really finish things, which I think is a very common kid writing thing. Oh, I'm gonna write a long novel, and you get it started, but you don't know how to finish. Finish is a particular skill, right, in writing. So I fell in love with the process, and our first book together came out. We turned it in 2 weeks before I had Madison. So I have a good sort of a good arc to the beginning of my career. And from there, I was able to stay home and work about 1 book a year, which was all I needed to do. I wasn't doing it. I was doing it a little more as a sideline and something wonderful to do with my family. And when my daughter got older and I had a little bit more time and a bunch more expertise, my mom and I were still writing together, but I started subbing my own stuff. And that's what happens with the career. And I just signed the contract for my 46th book.
46.
46.
Wow.
So that sounds like a very incomplete number. I said to an editor I work with yesterday or the day before, I was having a meeting with an editor, and I said, that feels very incomplete. That feels like I need to sell 4 more books, doesn't it?
And do you really enjoy writing?
I I love it. I mean, I'm surprised how much I enjoy it. I write stuff that I don't intend to publish because it's something that feels cathartic. It feels healthy to me. I sometimes write poetry. During the pandemic, I wrote all sorts of very emotional poems that helped me get through it. So I, I love the research. I love the challenge of it. I love, like I said, like the chiropractic metaphor. Like I love the math of it, getting it right. I love teaching it, and and I have also so many stories in my head, real and imagined, and I do really love it. I mean, I definitely did not understand that a writer isn't necessarily what you do, it's really who you are. If I was to go into banking today, 100% certain I'd still be writing. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So let's getting back to your latest book.
Okay.
You could choose which of your
Choose
latest books you
any
want
of
to
the
talk
latest books.
about.
You want to hear about a book that's coming out later? Okay. Yes, go ahead. Ask
Okay.
the question and
What
I'll
was
choose
the
which book.
inspiration for your latest book? Choose which
Oh, okay.
one.
Actually, it's so all the bird books, it's ridiculous for me to tell you the inspiration because you already know that.
Yeah.
So let me
Okay.
go back to, something funny. So let's go back to actually my newest book, which is
Okay.
KAZOO Emergency. There might be a KAZOO Emergency. So I was teaching with my friend Debbie E.Y. We were teaching early in the pandemic on Zoom. We were supposed to be in person, but it wound up being on Zoom. And we were just having sort of a banter in an open session. And I don't even remember what she said, but we were talking about just like the silliness of books and what you can do, where you can take an idea. What can you do with an idea? And there was something that she said, she actually remembered it, and I hadn't remembered what it was. So I can't tell you exactly, but it was that back and forth of our conversation that when we had a break from teaching, I sat down and I wrote the first draft of it. And there was no reason. It is the silliest book I've ever written. I want to say stupidest but in that good way, because it's about a kid who is kind of a loner, and he's walking to school with his backpack, which is clanking and making noise. And the new kid comes up and she says, "Hi, I'm Lola. Let's be friends." So this kind of Lola, and he goes, "Okay." And then they run into a problem. They run into some bullies, and then they run into she says, "What's in your backpack?" And he shows her some stuff, and he pulls out a colander and a feather duster. She's like, "What are those for?" And he's like, "Meh, I don't know." And he pulls out a kazoo, and she says, "What is that for?" And he says, "Well, there might be a kazoo emergency." And she says, "Has there ever been a kazoo emergency?" And he says, "Not yet." So of course, then where do you go in a story like that? So there is a school bus, there is a hot air balloon, there is a dinosaur, a T-Rex, and there are some geese. So how can you tangle that up, literally and metaphorically? How can you tangle that all up? And how does the kazoo, the colander, the feather duster, and a backpack packed full of books solve that problem? Well, obviously it's silly, right? So it's a kazoo emergency. So that's how that book came to be. And it was sort of like a puzzle to untangle. And so I did. And I'm hoping to write a second one, which was, I think the working title is, because really the title is great. Like you have to come up with a title that is up to that level. So I think it's going to be How to Say No to a Penguin, or It's Hard to Say No to a Penguin. Do I know what that book is about? Not a clue. But you know what I know? I mean, there's going to be a penguin, and it's going to be Gregory James and Lola, and there has to be some ridiculous situation. and I'm going to have to untangle it in some silly way. So sometimes you back into a book that way, and that's where that idea comes from.
Okay. So
I know. Where do you go from there?
did you have to do any research for that?
Absolutely zero.
Okay. That's
I
kind of
did
what I
have to
figured.
think about, but I did have to like really come up with ideas. Like what problem is a kazoo going to solve? So, you have to go through like sort of mental gymnastics for that. And again, I was backing into it because I already came up with the solution. I just had no idea what the problem was or how that solution was going to work.
Okay. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out the Kazoo Emergency?
Okay, so I wrote it as a picture book, and then I almost immediately thought this might be better as a graphic novel. So I actually had to rewrite it entirely as a graphic novel. So, and then it's always about finding the home. But then I contacted my editor who does the regular readers, or maybe even I might have been in a meeting with her in New York, and she said, "Oh, we're starting to do these graphic novels." And I said, "Oh, I have a manuscript that might work for." So that one had fewer challenges because this business is all about relationships. You get to know editors, and then you listen to what it is that they are looking for. So for me, the challenge of that was creating it into the format that it finally was in.
So what exactly would be the difference between the graphic novel format and a picture book format?
Okay, so a picture book format is generally, I'm going to talk in broad
Generally, yeah.
overtones here, is 32 pages. And a lot of the heavy lifting is done by the art. So if you're not the artist, you have to leave room for the art. And generally, everything that you look at when you open a picture book, even if it is, let me grab a book. So even if you have more than one illustration on it, you take in everything together. So this is from the book Adrift. So when you open it up, there might be a small amount of words, but you're taking in all of this page together. In a graphic novel, you are taking in small bits as it goes along the pages. So remember, this is a graphic novel for very young kids, so there's no more than 4 panels, but an older graphic novel may have 10 or 12 panels on the page. So you have to learn how you're reading it. See here, you can see something with the T-Rex and the feather duster. So the format is a little bit different. You're still reading a lot of the text, a lot of the actions through pictures. And also in a graphic novel, you take out a lot of the things that I'm really good at, which is atmosphere and character. And you go to pretty much just exposition and dialogue. So you can see here, all of the action is done by what they're saying. And in a picture book, that's not generally the case. You're describing stuff. Or in a graphic novel, that's not usually the case. There's some bits, not in this particular book, but there's some bits in many graphic novels that do some of that atmospheric stuff.
Now, do you have much contact or any contact with the artist?
Okay, this is like the number one question that people learning about writing does. So I'm in charge of the text. The illustrator is in charge of the art, and the editor is in charge of book. So the editor and really the art director, who they work together, is sort of the firewall between the two of us. So we think of it this way. The artist is not sitting in my writing room over my shoulder telling me what to write. So I do the same thing for them. 100% of the time. All right. I suppose other people might say that's not true, but I believe 100% of the time, if you let an illustrator do what an illustrator does, you get a whole new level, a whole new layer, of storytelling in your book. And it makes it just spectacularly something new and more interesting. The page I just showed you in Adrift, this guy, I did not write anything. I'm going to read you the text. and I think it's the first page. The sea was vast and angry and the darkest green that little mouse had ever seen. He tried to hoist his sail, but the wind was too strong. That's all the text that's on that I wrote on that page. And left to her own devices, look at that.
Wow.
I did not say there are creepy hands. The sea does not feel like a character. There are no monsters in this. This is just really the feeling, right? So Anastasia Suvorova, who is the illustrator of this, came up with that visual all on her own. I did not orchestrate that. And that's the level of extra storytelling that you get when you leave an artist to do what an artist does. I'm not an artist. I'm not telling them what to do. I will leave art notes in some things if so much of the telling of something is in the art that my words don't make any sense if there's not art notes, but that's the only time. That's the only time, unless invited by the editor to do so, which sometimes they do. In the readers, she always tells me, because a lot of the humor is in the art. So the illustrator is free to do whatever he or she wants, but also I give little ideas, like, because it's important that when I just say something little about the egg being hatched, I need it to be under a chair because it needs to be next to the plug, because the chick is going to hatch and then unplug those are important technical things in chicken karaoke.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. So what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Yay, my favorite question, because I love the books that are out, but it's also so much fun to look forward to the new books. So in the Silly series, which includes Flamingo Bingo and Toucan with Two Cans and Chicken Karaoke, the next books are Eagle in the End Zone, which is a flag football game. And then, so now I have to actually remember, Dodo Dodgeball, and then Penguin Parade. So that completes the arc of those stories. I have 2 picture books coming out soon-ish. Nope. I'm incorrect. I have 3 picture books coming out in the next couple years. I have one called She Sells Seashells, which is the real feminist telling of the Mary Anning story. Mary Anning being the little girl who found the bedrock is a pun, but I didn't mean it that way, of the fossils that really helped create paleontology. But she was an uneducated girl living in England. So that's coming out next year. And also have a book called Wren's Nest, which is coming out next year, and the illustrator is Eugenia Nobati, who did the illustrations for EQ Reek and Yuck You Suck. So this is so fun because it's a realistic story about a little girl and her bird-loving grandfather. You'll understand how that relates to my life, right? Who finds a nest when they move, and she watches the birds hatch and then fledge, grow and then fledge. So that's a fun, and I'm really excited for that. That's been a while coming. And you know why I'm really excited? Because I just saw the cover. When I see the art, I get really excited. And Emily Pack is the illustrator for She Sells Seashells. And that's coming out from Charles Bridge. And then, get this, I have a book coming out, and I think it'll be at least 2 years. And it is a book about a little girl in New York City who loved writing, and her first big success was writing a play for her first grade class. And now, while this is not fully nonfiction, this is a book about my mom. So it's called Janie Writes a Play. And the play is a real thing that happened. So we're waiting on illustrator Madeline Goodnight, who's going to illustrate that. So I'm excited. I have a whole bunch of other things coming up too. I don't want to forget anything. This is exciting and hasn't been fully announced yet, but it's also not a secret. I have a trilogy of young middle grade or sort of higher level chapter books. I'm not sure where it falls in that, about kids and a bird watching club, which has a real eco message. So it has all sort of a call to action about helping birds, and they're very exciting. Lots of things happen.
Wow.
So
So
is there
you're not busy at all.
not busy at all? You know what?
No.
But like I said, the writing is the fun part,
Yeah.
so I'm always writing something.
Well, okay, my next question, you just kind of answered my next question, sort of, maybe.
That's how you know
Um,
it's a good question.
what is your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
Oh, I think it's just when you're in it, when you're in the research and the writing. Now, I love research. So I don't want to say that's my favorite part, but it is kind of my favorite part. When I tell kids, I say it's just another word for getting to learn interesting things about something you want to know stuff about. And for me, when you're in the research, like there's no no's. No one's saying you need to revise it. No one's saying it doesn't work. Nobody's saying it's not right for the market. Nobody's saying no, 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 no. Nobody's reviewing it. You're not terrified about any of that. You're just in the learning part of it. I would say the nerdy part of me, that's my favorite thing. Like I light up when I saw that railroad. I was just, are you kidding? I need to know all the stuff about this. So I'm busy looking for articles and finding books and just trying to figure out how I can learn more about it. But I also love the putting the words on the paper. I'm not afraid of a blank piece of paper. I know that some people feel intimidated by that. I have to start. I'm never intimidated by that. That's like so exciting. It's like jumping into a river, right? It's refreshing, and you just have no idea what's going to happen. And there's that magical moment. And I'm sort of torn about calling it magical because I don't want to say it. I don't want anybody to think that it's not hard work. But if you're a working writer, if you're really someone who is in that process, you understand what I mean by that magic moment where you don't feel in charge of it anymore. Like those characters are galloping along in front of you and you're just typing to keep up. And something appears on the page. And again, I don't want to say, I mean, it is, of course, all my hard work going into it, but it feels like something just appears on the page. You have no idea where it came from, where in your brain it came from. And that's a moment of pure wonder. Like, how did that happen? And it never gets old. I mean, it really never gets old. And then, of course, there's the moment when you see the art. If you're not an artist, seeing the art. So seeing those things that were so personal to you, like in the beginning, it's just me and those characters, or it's just me in that story, or whatever you're writing about. It's just all inside my head. It's on my computer. It's in my hands when I print it out. But then when it becomes something bigger than that, when the art comes in, I have given you the worst answer. I'm sorry. I gave you all the parts that I love. All
It's
of them
okay.
together.
That's fine.
It's really, the whole project is just really filled with wonderful moments and awesome things. That being said, 2/3 of the way in, everything I'm writing, I'm completely stumped. So at that 2/3 mark, I hate writing. I never want to write another thing. I'm a failure. Everything's terrible. We joke a lot amongst ourselves about how failure is part of the process. Like if there's not one moment or 1 hour or 1 week or 1 7-year period where I think this is a complete failure and I've completely ruined it, then I'm not in the process. Like that's just part of it.
Right. So what do you consider the most challenging part of the writing process?
That 2/3. So
Okay.
so you've written all the fun stuff, like you're just jogging with the plot, everything's coming. And I don't care if it's a poem or a novel. It's at that same moment where you've written yourself right up to the moment where you have to solve things. I almost always I can see the ending. I know what the ending is, but there's that moment where your characters have to do something to fix what you've made wrong, solve the problem, get over the hurdle, whatever it is that you've created, this crevasse that is between your characters getting to the end and where you're standing. And I know it's another metaphor, but I'm standing at the edge there, and it never fails. I have to stop there. I know it's coming. I can feel, I'm like, I'm jogging, I'm running, and then you just stop. And even as experienced as I am, I've been doing this for almost 30 years now, professionally writing and publishing. So I'm writing successful stuff. It never fails. I will never get through writing something where I don't have to stop there. I'm a fan of knowing your own process. A lot of people say, oh, well, that's the point where I stop and drive around. I take a walk. I do a yoga class. I walk the dog. I take a trip, whatever your process is. I know when I'm really stuck, I get in the shower. There's something about the water on my head that loosens up my brain, that untangles the knots. I don't know what it is. So that's for me a plot helping situation that really, really works, or work on something else. But that is truly the hardest part, because there has never been a 2/3 of the way through anything where I don't struggle and am sure that this piece is never going to work and that my career is over. But that's part of the process. But that is the hardest part. That, and listening to no, of course, rejection being part of a writer's journey. You just have to get used to it.
Yeah, one thing that you did mention, and I really wanted to bring up, was your poetry. Um, is that a really challenging part, trying to make your books into poetry? Or
I think so. I think my natural voice is pretty poetic. And I love that math problem part of it. And I feel that way about poetry a lot. Like when it's right, you know, it's right. Like there's not, I feel like, and I know this sounds silly, in poetry more than anything else, I tend to think it's like math in that there's one right answer. And I just have to get there. And there's a lot of fiddling that has to go on. And, you know, you got to show your work, right? And you got to, sometimes you got the wrong answer and you got to go back to the beginning. But that's not an actual thing. In poetry, there isn't only one answer. And in fact, in poetry, there's lots of ways to do it. But for me, when I'm writing a specific poem, that's how it feels to me. I know when it's right because I've got it. Like I got the answer. I can show all my work. Every step I've done is correct. And the answer is right there on the page and it's correct mathematically. So it's a weird way to think. My mother yelled at me. She's like, poetry is not math. It's the furthest thing from math. But to me, it always feels that way, more so than any other type of writing, because other types of writing have more wiggle room. I guess that might be the longer your book is, or the longer your piece is, the more you have to play around with language or take detours, and there might be multiple detours or red herrings or whatever. But in picture books, and then even smaller in poetry, I really feel like you really have to have that there's one way to get it right.
So what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Like having to do with actually writing, or adventure I've
Just
been on that.
your favorite adventure altogether, just, going somewhere, or just being with other people, or just your whole adventure.
Okay, so, well, I mean, if it's like adventure, I am obsessed with pirates. So I'm always trying. I have not yet written a pirate book, but I eventually I'm gonna. I even know what the pirate book is about, and I need to do more research. And I found it I almost told the story when you said, what was the most fun research? But I haven't written it yet, but I know what I want it to be, but I just haven't figured out how to tell the story. And I've had it in my brain for about 13 years. One day I'm gonna write that. And what's gonna happen is I'm gonna pitch it to an editor, and the editor is gonna want it, and then I'm gonna be forced to do it. So I am always chasing pirate museums, pirate books. My boyfriend came home the other day and he said, look, Heidi, I got you the best gift. And it turned out it was the National Geographic pirate issue.
Oh,
That was the best, nerdiest gift I've ever gotten. But that being said, being a writer is a super alone, you and your characters in your office, or in my case right now in my living room, because my office is being renovated. So it's pretty solo. We talk a lot. Actually, Zoom has been really good for us socially, I think. So I love a writing retreat. So I have several friends and several groups of friends that we get together and we go and just talk writing and talk the business and look at each other's stuff, talk art, do all that stuff. I love to go to the Highlights Foundation. That's one of my favorite places in the entire world. I also have some friends who I meet at a house in Maine, and we do that sort of thing. So for me, that's a sort of different kind of adventure. And it's not unlike my real life, because in my family, I have a lot of critique partners built in, but I love that feeling of camaraderie that happens in a writing workshop or a which I teach a lot of, but also a time away to just concentrate on what you're doing. And that for me, is a group of like-minded nerdy people. So that a couple of times, but it's totally true. Like, we go on walks and talk about the colors we're seeing, and we sit at dinner and talk about the editors we know and what it is we wrote before breakfast and stuff like that. So for me, that's an adventurous, fun thing. But also, I love finding ideas in new places, and that always takes me on some sort of adventure. And a lot of that might come from my upbringing. My dad, like I said, my dad was a professor and my mom was a writer. So many of our summers were in our camper, the one that you used to pull behind and crank open. And it was going to wherever my dad was off, because he was a professor. So he had the summers off. And we would pack the 3 kids up, and we would go to wherever my mom got a teaching gig for the summer, for 2 weeks here or a conference there. And we would go on what my family called serendipity trips. And that was just a trip that we had no plans. We had a destination, but no plans. So if anybody saw a sign, we didn't have the Google. So we were just looking at signs on the roadside, and there was dinosaur fossils that way. So if anybody in the car wanted to try that out, that's what we would do. So I think I live my life a little bit like that when I'm doing things. Like, everything is a serendipity trip. If you see something interesting, pull over and figure out what it is. Go see it, go research it, make it into a story.
Okay. So now, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Don't be afraid of revision. Everything is revision, and you find your story in the revision. And that's directly from my mom. Like, I swear I would probably be the type of writer who if somebody said, no, this is bad, I would throw it away. Except that my mother has taught me, no, you work on it. Don't take it seriously. And don't take the criticism seriously. Use that to make things better. So I think that's definitely it.
Okay. And is that the piece of advice you would give to other writers, or do you have any more?
Oh, I have so much advice.
I figured.
All right. I'll give you sort of one that probably, I don't know if anybody else would give you, which is the word intentionality. I use this so much when I'm teaching that at Highlights, one of my students they have a rock garden there with words, so you can make poetry. So it's like a poetry garden. And one of my students had a rock made that said intentionality, because I talk about it so much. But I used to think it was so ridiculous that actors would always be doing interviews, and they're like, well, I had to find the backstory for my character because it deepens the character. And I know that you don't know, but I knew that his parents were divorced and that he found a puppy in the woods when he was 12. And I thought that was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard. And of course, just act. But I think that's really important. And I'm not talking that I don't need you to find the puppy in the woods or know about the divorce, but but you really need to understand what happened before and who your character is. Some people do exercises where they talk to their character or they interview them. I don't do any of that stuff. And it's great. I think it's amazing. It's just not my process. But I really do think that every single word you put on a page, there has to be intentionality behind it. If you use a or the, be intentional about it. You may not think it is a big deal, but read it out loud and read the difference if you say the sentence or a and then the sentence, and figure out how it changes the whole scope of that page. And it seems like such a little thing, but especially when you're talking about only 32 pages and only maybe 400 or 500 words, or even just 1,200 words, every single word has to have your full knowledge behind it. Like you have tried other words for that, and that you can back that up. We have a line in a book my mom and I did together called A Kite for Moon. And I'm gonna botch it, but it says the second part of a sentence is red kites, green kites, blue kites, yellow. And like with students to switch it up, to read it differently and see why it is really intentional the way that the sentence structure is. If you move yellow to the beginning or put kites at the end of yellow, it changes the whole page. And so it's intentionality is probably the piece of advice that I give the most, and I really stand behind.
Mm-hmm. Excuse me.
It's the fire. It's the fires in Canada.
That's probably true. So are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you would recommend to other writers that have helped you in your career?
Well, number one, SCBWI. That's the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators. I love them. I teach for them. I can't imagine my career without them. Every time my mom was the second person to join the organization before there was an I, so it was just SCBW. And I have been a lifelong member. I mean, I think I was, 6 years old when it started. So, it's where you can belong. It's where you find like-minded people. It's where, look, I don't get paid a ton of money to teach there, but I teach there because it's giving back. And you will find all the information about the business and people to help you with answers to questions there. And the other place that I am extremely fond of is the Highlights Foundation. And they have a retreat center where I go write. I'm going to go write pretty soon, where I also teach. I'm teaching this year. I'm teaching at the PJ Library retreat. So I'm teaching picture book writing there to Jewish writers. And I'm teaching in their nonfiction summer camp. So teaching all sorts of nonfiction writing. And what it is you really get to work in both these places very closely with working professionals. And I think that I don't know a job where the people working in the business try as much as the people that I know working in this business to give back, to help out, to, dispense knowledge. It can feel like a lonely place, and it is not an easy place to get into. And I don't mean get into, but publishing is a whole other thing, right? You have to put yourself out there. And all the people I know who work in the business have a very big feeling of responsibility to help new people coming up. So those are my two favorite organizations, but man, there's a lot of great places. There's the Writer's Barn, there's the Writer's Loft. I'm just trying to think of ones, just amazing places where there's teaching by working professionals going on. And I feel like I should keep talking, right? You can work it out.
No, that's okay. Okay, now I have some questions about you as a person.
Oh my goodness. I'm terrible.
What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
I think I'm such an open book. I'm not sure that there's anything that people don't realize about me. Yeah, no, the thing that nobody realizes about me, although I am pretty open about it, is that though if you meet me professionally, I seem like an absolute extrovert. I seem completely comfortable. I have no problem getting on stage. I have no problem moderating a panel or speaking to you here. I am incredibly shy and introverted and filled with anxiety. I mean, like, I think a lot of us are. I have developed over the years what I call, and of course, everything's a metaphor, right? If you write, everything's a metaphor. I call it my author coat. So when I walk into those situations, I slip on my metaphoric author coat and I become author Heidi. And she is an incredibly different person than if you met me in a grocery store, because I probably would pretend I didn't see you and keep walking. And that's because I have social anxiety. So I probably, lots of people know this about me, but I like to make sure people know that, because I feel like when they see me professionally, they think, oh, it's such a breeze to her. Everything, that she's very comfortable in front of a crowd. She talks to everybody. It is really author Heidi, who's a very different person wearing that big coat. It's protecting her from the social anxiety. So I think that would be the thing that people don't know.
That's what a lot of authors have mentioned to me.
Mm-hmm.
A lot. That's because writing is very solitary,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
And we choose that.
yes, exactly.
I call
Exactly.
writers' conferences a bunch of introverts pretending to be extroverts.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. This is a hard question. Okay.
Oh no.
You might not even be able to answer this one, but you might also have a great answer for this one.
The pressure, the unbelievable pressure.
Pressure, pressure. Yes. Um, what question do you wish interviewers would ask you? And what would your answer be?
Oh my goodness. I was actually thinking that, right, the question you asked me before, what is it that you wish people, what you wish people would, I wish people would ask actually about stage fright and how do you do that?
Ah,
Because I mean, to this day, I mean, I was teaching on Zoom when we first started during the pandemic, teaching on Zoom. I actually almost passed out during a presentation. I mean, it's funny now, but it was terrifying back then. And I thought, how am I, I've been doing this for 25 years at the time, right? 26 years. How am I still so darn nervous speaking in front of a crowd? And when I realized, because I thought, okay, I opened the door. I can see it on the playback. I could see it. I could see that I got hot. I could see that I started pulling my clothes away from me. I saw how much water I was drinking. I'd reached open and it was the winter and I'd opened the door for the cold air. And so I was so nervous the next time. And I realized the problem was I wasn't breathing. Because I get a little more nervous. It's better now, but I get a little more nervous when I'm being recorded. I don't know why, because it's more permanent. I don't know does there have to be a reason? And then I beat myself up for about a week. I was calling all my friends saying, what kind of an idiot am I that I forgot to breathe and almost passed out in the middle of a speech? So I wish people would ask. I mean, I talk a lot about process and stuff, but there's all this behind the scenes stuff about because people ask me all the time personally. I have my first book coming out. I'm so nervous about getting up in front of a crowd. And I actually have a practical piece of advice for that is before we Zoomed, I opened a private Zoom room and just talked to myself a little bit. I have to own the space before I do it. So I never sit in the audience and get called up to give a speech without first going up to the podium and standing there, if at all possible, and sort of seeing. You never want to have that first time looking out at the audience. I mean, even if it's not the audience, even if it's an empty room, you want to be able to have that already in your brain about what that feels like. So that's, for years, I was so nervous. And even now, like I said, 29 years of speaking publicly, and I still don't really sleep the day before I'm teaching, because I'm just going over all the things I don't want to remember to breathe. Wait, did I remember that? Did I fix that sentence that wasn't right in the thing? Do I have the right books? Am I presenting with the right books? Did I forget that I wanted to talk about this new book I just found? So that I wish people would talk about a little more, because I think it's such a universal that people personally ask my advice and counsel on it all the time. But interviews, I don't know that anybody's ever asked it to me in an interview.
That is very, really important. I think a lot of people are they're, since they are shy,
Mhm.
it's very hard for people to get up in front of an audience, especially for the first time.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And for the 101st time, honestly,
Yeah,
it's
really.
even if you're a natural at it, there's still part of it that is, you want to be worth the money. You want to have people saying nice things about you. It's human nature to have that be a nerve-wracking
Right.
thing.
Okay. So, what is or are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time to do the things that you love
I don't know. Do I do the things I love?
aside from writing?
I know. I still love bird watching. I don't do it enough. I don't do it. I don't do it like specifically, but I have binoculars in my car, and I always have binoculars with me. I probably have a pair at every window in my house. So I'm trying to be better about going out and actually doing it. I love kayaking. There's something about being on the water. I'm really afraid of the water, but I love sort of being my own little island. So kayaking feels like that. It's very peaceful in this weird way. Also, I love reading. And I mean, I spend a lot of time in bookstores. I don't know. It's weird, because I think my obsession has become children's literature, because I enjoy it that much. It feels like a real bonus that I get to do it for work as well. I mean, there's a lot of boring parts of that. The business part of it is not as exciting, but I spend a lot of time. Tomorrow I'm going to a book event of somebody else's, so that's exciting. I love to cook. I don't cook enough because, well, we had a pandemic for a while, so nobody had anybody over, but I also live by myself now. My family's all, I'm an empty nester. So, yeah, I like doing lots of things. I do like taking hikes, light hikes, because of a bad back, but yeah, I like sitting on the porch and reading a book. I like RuPaul's Drag Race, I like lots of different things. Just like everybody.
So I know that your writing space is being renovated right now.
Ugh.
So,
For the
but what is
last
it
year.
normally? But what do you normally do when you're writing? Do you like to listen to music? Do you like silence? Um,
I
and
am
can you write anywhere? What does your writing space look like?
I can write anywhere. I write equally sitting at my desk and sitting on the sofa or sitting in my bed. I'm fine with any of that sort of stuff. Music is a hard no. And TV is no, but I can do sort of human sounds. So like I can write at a coffee shop, but I can't write in my own house if there's music, which is sort of a funny thing. I have a weird love for silence. And my significant other, he once said to me, he's like, you were so weird. How is it that you can drive in a car with no music on? I don't understand it. It is the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life, Heidi. And I said, Dennis, the reason why is a writer's brain is a weird thing. So music for me shuts my brain off. It puts me only in the music. I can't think past the music. My brain is musical. I mean, I used to do music. My brother's a musician. I think that my brain goes, okay, there's music on. Now everything has that cadence. I can hear the words, even if it's not words, I can hear just the notes. And I couldn't write anything because it would be to that rhythm. It would never be a rhythm I created. But also, silence is where a writer's brain works stuff out. Like, even if I'm not writing stuff on a page, my brain is still in that story. Might not be in the front, might not be where I can even access it, but my brain is still working on that story. Driving long car rides in silence is some of the best sort of thinking I do, whether it's consciously or unconsciously. And so, like, when I go to highlights, it's a 4.5 hour drive for me. And for the first 2 hours, I'll listen to an audiobook, because then I'm not processing my own story. And then I'll turn it off and I'll ride in silence, because it sort of clears my head to really receive all that good work on the stories that I am working on. So it's a weird thing. For me, it's silence is the number one key.
Okay. Now, writers often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do you have any? And what do you have? And do they help or hinder you?
Presently, I have one very large, orange, lovable cat named Romeo. He's technically my daughter's cat, but her significant other is very allergic, as is mine. Dennis, this is a long battle on the men who are allergic to cats. But I would say Romeo is both a help and a hindrance. He is a cuddler. So if I am in need of support, he is a very supportive cat. But in the writing department, he is 18 pounds approximately, and he likes to sit on your keyboard. So he is not helpful. And I do have a favorite writing chair, especially since I'm out of the office right now. And it is definitely a one-person chair, but Romeo thinks it's a one-person, one cat chair. And so if my hands are on the keyboard, this is how I'm trying to write when Romeo's sitting with me. So he's definitely a hindrance.
Okay.
He's snoring in the corner now.
I see. So how important is the New England setting been to your writing?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, first of all, we are filled in New England with writers. So it gives you such a wonderful community, a supportive community. I know a lot of people who are working in the same business I am. Often when I go places, I drive with them, or I see them there. And that's a really wonderful thing. And also for me, I grew up on the farm I live in on now. But I left when I was 18, and I didn't come back until my dad was ill, and Madison was 7. So she's 28 now. So a lot of years ago. And so my dad and I, while he was sick, we built a house on the farm. So I'm actually now next to my mother on this very big non-working farm. Although if you looked right out there, a farmer comes and hays our field. So it is sort of a working farm. But outside my window, I have bobcat and I have bears, I have a very annoying groundhog. I've got a ton of birds. I've got fox. I've got, did I say deer? My herd this year is 14 adult deer in my backyard. So I'm really set in a natural setting, which for me really feeds what I do, what I write. So it's very conducive to writing for me where I am. It's relaxing, it's quiet. And I'm surrounded by presently. I mean, obviously sometimes it's not green, but right now I'm really surrounded by green. And that for me, every desk that I write at has to be facing a window, because above my computer screen needs to be the outdoors. And that's always been really important to me. In the configuration of how I am sitting. And often I will look up and, have my binoculars next to me and I'll be looking at what's going on outside.
Okay. Now I just have two more questions for you. Um, One is where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I have to do a plug for Annie's.
Absolutely.
You can get Heidi's books, excuse me, you can get Heidi's books at Annie's Bookstop of Worcester if you call us at 508-796-5613. Or
Yay.
or you can you can email us at orders@anniesbooksworcester.com. And even if we don't have the particular book you're looking for, we can try and order it for you. So please do give us a call. And where else can people find your books?
Well, I like to say that I do not police other people's book buying habits. We all know what that means, right? However,
Yes, we do.
I buy all my books, and I wish you would also buy all your books at independent booksellers. Annie's is great. I have local ones here. I have the Odyssey Bookshop. I have High Five Bookshop. I have the Eric Carle gift shop is a bookstore. Interlink or Book Links is near me. I live at a place that has lots of great bookstores. But I think what the message that I want to make sure that everybody knows, and what you just said about Annie's, is if your local bookstore does not have the book you want, it doesn't matter. They will order any book that is available to them to order. So yes, it may not show up on your doorstep tomorrow, but that's not really the issue, is it? It's about supporting our local bookstores, and we don't want them to go away. I live at a bookstore. I am constantly going into bookstores. We don't want them to go away. And the other thing is, don't forget your libraries. Supporting your local authors, your favorite authors, is all about buying their books at local bookstores, but also taking them out of libraries, because books that aren't circulated don't stay in libraries. So everybody remember that. Also, call Annie's. They'll get you my books.
Thanks. Thank you.
That's the bottom line.
Right. And my last question is how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
Yay. Well, let's see. My website is HeidiEYStemple.com. I keep a pretty simple website because I do all my mother's social media stuff too. So I don't have all that much time to do it, but you can find all of my books and what my books are about. I write a little blurb for each of my books. It talks about my school visits. It has a very out of date calendar, which reminds me, I'll get on that and send to my brother, my webmaster, my calendar situation. But also you can follow me on different social medias. My professional page on Facebook is Heidi E.Y Stemple. I am not very active on that. Just go ahead onto my regular Facebook, which is always public, which is just Heidi Stemple. I'm Heidi E.Y.S. That stands for Elizabeth Yolen Stemple. It is not yes. So Heidi E.Y.S. on Instagram and Twitter, which I don't use very often for multiple reasons. But so yeah, you can always contact me there.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Heidi, for joining me here. And hopefully we will be seeing you sometime at our store.
Hey, invite me. I'm always happy to come.
Okay. Thank you very much, Heidi, for being with us.
Well, thank you so much. So you're probably going to have to edit half of my stuff out because I speak so much. There's way more than anybody wants to know about me here, but I have had such a wonderful time talking to you.
Thank you. I've had a great time talking to you too. We will be seeing you.
All right.